This is like super personal and weird. It would have been a nightmare scenario for me to live through.
At 76 years old, Stevie Nicks has lived her entire life on her own terms. The Fleetwood Mac legend never followed anyone else's rules, whether in her music, her relationships, or the way she spoke her mind. But recently, she did something that surprised even her most devoted fans. She quietly revealed the 7 artists she simply could not tolerate. These weren't just minor disagreements or temporary spats. They were deep conflicts built on betrayal, backstage fights, and years of unresolved anger. When Stevie Nicks burns a bridge, there is no going back. The first person on her list was someone who knew her better than almost anyone else, yet caused her the most pain. Lindsey Buckingham was more than just her bandmate in Fleetwood Mac. He was her former lover, her creative partner, and eventually, her biggest enemy. Their relationship began as one of rock music's most passionate romances, but it slowly turned into a bitter war that lasted for decades. Stevie and Lindsey didn't just make music together. They created something magical and dangerous. Fans saw the passion between them, but Stevie saw something darker. She believed that Lindsey resented her power and success from the very beginning. Their romantic relationship ended just as Fleetwood Mac was becoming famous, but they remained trapped together in the band, fighting a creative battle that would last for years. Every song became a weapon in their personal war. Stevie poured her heartbreak into songs like Dreams, while Lindsey responded with his own musical attacks. The rest of the band watched helplessly as two legends slowly destroyed each other in front of audiences around the world. Stevie later claimed that Lindsey tried to sabotage her both personally and professionally. He would mock her lyrics during rehearsals, roll his eyes while she performed on stage, and insist on changing her songs to fit his own vision. Despite all of this, Stevie stayed in the band for decades. But in 2018, she finally reached her breaking point. She gave the band an ultimatum. Either Lindsey goes, or she does. The band chose her. Lindsey was fired from Fleetwood Mac after more than 40 years. "I wasn't going to be bullied anymore," Stevie said later. "Not by someone who never wanted me to succeed." For Stevie, this wasn't just about ending their professional relationship. It was about getting revenge for years of mistreatment. But Lindsey wasn't the only man who left Stevie feeling wounded and angry. The next person on her list broke her heart in a completely different way, and she never let him forget it. Don Henley of the Eagles was supposed to be the love of her life. He called her the one who got away. But she called him a mistake she couldn't afford to repeat. When Stevie fell in love with Don Henley, it seemed like a perfect match. They were both successful musicians with undeniable chemistry. But behind the scenes, their relationship was troubled from the start. Don wanted something from Stevie that she couldn't give him: complete control over her life. Their relationship was passionate but unstable, filled with late nights, big tours, and constant fighting about their different goals and values. The most painful part of their relationship came when Stevie discovered she was pregnant with Don's child. Don expected her to settle down, start a family, and become the kind of woman who would fit into his traditional view of life. But Stevie had different plans. She chose to end the pregnancy, deciding that her career was more important than a life she wasn't ready for. Don never forgave her for this decision, and Stevie never forgot how he tried to control her story. In interviews after their breakup, Don painted himself as the victim who had been abandoned by the woman he loved. But Stevie saw this differently. "He wanted to own the narrative," she said once. "But I was never going to be someone's afterthought." Their split became symbolic of everything Stevie refused to compromise on. She believed in love, but not at the cost of her freedom and independence. The third person on Stevie's list was someone completely different from the men who had hurt her. Courtney Love represented everything that Stevie thought was wrong with women in rock music. When these two strong personalities crossed paths, it wasn't just a disagreement between artists. It was a full-scale war between two completely different philosophies about music and life. Stevie had always been known for her mystical, poetic approach to music, combined with discipline and grace. When she looked at Courtney Love, she saw everything she warned young women in music to avoid: reckless behavior, no self-control, and constant self-destruction. The conflict started when Courtney made some public comments in the 1990s, dismissing Fleetwood Mac as safe and overhyped. Stevie didn't respond publicly, but people close to her said she was furious. The real confrontation happened backstage at a tribute show in Los Angeles. According to witnesses, Courtney, who appeared to be high and was being very loud, barged into Stevie's dressing room without being invited. Stevie, always professional, asked her to leave. What happened next was a tense standoff, with Stevie staring Courtney down and saying just one word: enough. People who were there said the whole room went silent, as if something sacred had been disturbed. Courtney reportedly laughed and stormed out, shouting words that were too offensive to repeat. Stevie didn't chase after her. She simply closed the door and had Courtney, his name removed from the group finale that night. She made it clear that chaos might sell records, but it doesn't earn respect from serious musicians. From that moment on, Stevie made it known that she had no patience for people who disguised destructive behavior as rebellion. To her, Courtney represented everything wrong with how the music industry glamorized destruction and self-harm. The fourth person on Stevie's list was Madonna, someone who challenged everything Stevie believed about music and femininity. To Stevie, Madonna's rise to fame wasn't just a cultural change. It was a warning sign about where the music industry was heading. It became more about shock than soul, she once told a friend, and that's when I knew we were losing something important. Stevie had spent her entire career crafting lyrics that were like poetry, intimate and spiritual. Madonna, on the other hand, built her career on constant reinvention, shocking images, and calculated controversy. When the two women finally met at an industry party in the late 1980s, Stevie was not impressed. Madonna was surrounded by dancers, stylists, and photographers, treating even private moments like a performance. When Stevie tried to introduce herself, Madonna didn't even look up. Later that night, Stevie told a fellow artist, "That wasn't a woman, that was a machine." She felt that Madonna had turned vulnerability into a costume and authenticity into a marketing strategy. Stevie wasn't jealous of Madonna's success. She was disappointed that the industry had started rewarding spectacle over real substance. To Stevie, Madonna was the face of this troubling change in music. "There was no mystery left," Stevie said once. "Everything was exposed, and nothing meant anything anymore." She later described Madonna as a brand, not a voice, and privately confessed that she felt Madonna had emptied out the meaning of femininity and filled it with empty packaging. The two women never spoke again, but Stevie wasn't just criticizing one pop star. She was mourning a change in music that felt hollow and meaningless to her. The fifth person on her list was Prince, an artist whose talent Stevie deeply respected, but whose personality she found impossible to work with. When two musical legends try to collaborate, you expect great things. But when Stevie Nicks and Prince attempted to work together, the result was tension and misunderstanding. She called him otherworldly, a musical force unlike anything she'd ever known. But behind her admiration was something else: fear. Not fear of who he was, but fear of what he brought out in her. Their relationship began positively. Stevie was obsessed with Prince's song Little Red Corvette and used its groove as inspiration for her hit song Stand Back. Out of respect, she called Prince to ask permission to use his influence. Not only did he say yes, but he showed up at her studio that same night, played the keyboard parts, and then disappeared like a ghost. Stevie was amazed by his talent and professionalism. But that was the last time things went smoothly between them. Prince later wanted to collaborate again, but this time he insisted on doing things his way. He sent her a demo with no vocals and no lyrics, just music, and expected her to complete it according to his vision. Stevie felt overwhelmed by the intensity of his expectations. "I felt like I was being pulled into a place I wasn't ready to go," she admitted later. She declined the collaboration, and Prince never contacted her again. Years later, after Prince's death, Stevie spoke of him with respect, but you could still hear the tension in her voice when she talked about him. The magic between them was real, but so was his need for control. And Stevie had never liked being told what to do, not even by a genius like Prince. The sixth person on her list was Dave Grohl, the energetic leader of the Foo Fighters. Stevie isn't intimidated by energy and passion, but she has no tolerance for ego disguised as enthusiasm. When she first met Dave Grohl, she thought she had found someone who shared her love of music. He was passionate, productive, and respected throughout the music industry. But the moment they tried to work together, everything fell apart. Stevie was invited to participate in an informal studio session with Dave and several other musicians. She expected a creative exchange where everyone would contribute ideas. Instead, according to people close to her, she encountered a wall of sound and no space for her input. Dave dominated every beat, every guitar riff, and every conversation. When Stevie tried to suggest a slower tempo or a change to the lyrics, Dave laughed it off and turned up the volume even louder. She later confided to friends that it felt like being shouted out of the room. The session ended abruptly when Stevie left in the middle of a song, saying only, "This isn't music, it's noise." There's no official conflict between them, but fans have noticed that she has never mentioned Dave Grohl in interviews since that day. For someone as talkative as Stevie, that silence speaks volumes about her feelings. The seventh and final person on Stevie's list was Christina Aguilera, a pop star whose vocal talent Stevie couldn't deny, but whose approach to music she couldn't stand. At first, it wasn't personal. Stevie had nothing against pop stars, and she certainly respected talent. Christina Aguilera had plenty of vocal ability. But the first time Stevie saw her perform live, she didn't hear artistry. She heard chaos and showing off. "There's a difference between singing and showing off," she allegedly told a close friend, "and I don't have patience for the second." The real tension surfaced during a televised tribute concert where both Stevie and Christina were scheduled to perform. Stevie had hoped the night would be about honoring the legacy of women who had paved the way in music. Instead, she watched in silence as Christina hit high note after high note, turning a heartfelt ballad into what Stevie later described as a vocal acrobatic routine. Backstage, sources say that Stevie avoided Christina entirely and left before the finale. She reportedly told her team, "It's like being in a room with someone who's yelling compliments at you. It's exhausting." Stevie's problem wasn't with pop music itself. It was with excess, with ego, and with the idea that volume equals emotion. In Christina, she saw everything she had spent her career pushing against: flash over genuine feeling. Looking back at these 7 conflicts, it's clear that Stevie Nicks never set out to start feuds with other artists. But when you spend decades in an industry built on competition, egos, and spectacle, conflict becomes almost impossible to avoid. Each of these artists represented more than just personal tension for Stevie. They were mirrors that reflected different aspects of what she saw as problems in the music industry. They were triggers that brought out her protective instincts about the art form she loved. They were warnings about where music was heading, and sometimes they were cautionary tales about what happens when talent isn't balanced with wisdom and restraint. For Stevie, these weren't just grudges that she held onto out of spite. They were lessons that had been carved into her heart through experiences of heartbreak, defiance, and the raw cost of staying true to yourself in a difficult industry. Whether the conflict started with love that turned to resentment, like her relationships with Lindsey Buckingham and Don Henley, or admiration that crumbled into disappointment, like her encounters with Prince and Madonna, each experience left a permanent mark. These conflicts affected not just her music, but the woman she became over the decades. Through all of these battles and disappointments, Stevie Nicks never lost her voice. She continued to speak her truth in the studio, on the stage, and in interviews, even when the industry tried to silence her or force her to conform to other people's expectations. She survived and thrived in rock and roll, not by following the rules, but by rewriting them according to her own values and vision. Stevie's story with these 7 artists shows us something important about staying authentic in a world that constantly pressures people to compromise their values. Her conflicts weren't always pretty, and her responses weren't always perfect, but they were always honest. She chose to speak her truth regardless of the consequences, and in doing so, she maintained her integrity as both an artist and a person. The music industry has always been a place where strong personalities clash, where creative differences can turn into personal wars, and where the pressure to succeed can bring out the worst in people. Stevie Nicks navigated this challenging world for more than 5 decades, and her conflicts with these 7 artists tell the story of someone who refused to be pushed around, controlled, or silenced. Whether you agree with her positions or not, you have to respect her commitment to being exactly who she was, no matter what it cost her.